Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a completely fresh look at the business world. We usually just picture stock markets, massive profit margins, or climbing the corporate ladder. But if you actually peel back the layers, business isn't just about money. It's essentially this massive, complex survival system for our entire society. It is literally the engine keeping humanity moving forward. So here's our game plan. We're going to cover the great economic problem, business as the transformation engine, choosing an economic system, who satisfies our needs, and finally, the science of management. All right, starting things off with Section 1, the great economic problem. Here is the dramatic, almost impossible mathematical dilemma that drives absolutely everything. How does society survive when human wants are totally 100% infinite, but the Earth's resources, well, they're strictly finite? Every single day, we wake up and face this massive conflict. We want it all, but there's only so much stuff to actually go around. Think of it as the ultimate balancing act. On one hand, you have our unlimited needs, constantly pressing inward. On the other, our stubbornly limited resources pushing back. And right there in the middle, that sweet spot is the satisfaction of society's needs. That's the core economic principle in a nutshell, trying to squeeze the absolute maximum satisfaction out of the bare minimum of resources. Let's look at the infinite needs side of things for a second. Human needs are, well, a bottomless pit. You've probably heard of Maslow's hierarchy, right? We start with the absolute basics to keep us alive, stuff like food and water. But the second we get those, we don't just kick back and say, cool, I'm done. No way. We immediately start wanting safety, then social belonging, then a sense of esteem, and eventually we're chasing really complex psychological goals like self-realization. Our demands as a society never actually stop. They just keep evolving. Now stack those infinite demands against our incredibly limited toolkit. We've literally only got 4 types of resources to work with. First, natural resources, land, water, minerals. We can't just wave a magic wand and create more of these. Second, human resources, which is all of our labor and mental skills. Third, capital. And hey, quick side note, in economics, capital doesn't just mean a pile of cash. It means the actual physical assets used to build things like factories, machinery, or computers. And finally, entrepreneurship. That's the rare drive of individuals willing to shoulder massive risks. Think Elon Musk or Richard Branson. That is the whole shebang. That's all we have to satisfy the entire planet's infinite needs. Moving right along to Section 2, business, the transformation engine. Let's ground this with a super simple analogy, a bakery. Think about how the magic actually happens. You start with those scarce, raw resources, flour, sugar, mixers, and people working. The bakery acts as this amazing transformation engine. Through the actual process of production, it magically turns those raw materials into something totally new and valuable, bread. This bread satisfies a real societal need, and in exchange, it generates a profit. That simple flow, raw materials transforming into value, is the actual beating heart of the global economy. So the takeaway here is that a business isn't just a brick-and-mortar building or a catchy logo. It is a highly active, moving process. To work, it absolutely has to have 4 things perfectly synced up: human activities, actual production, in exchange with society, and yes, profit generation. Take just one of those away, and the entire engine stalls out. Okay, Section 3, choosing an economic system. So if resources are this scarce, somebody has to make the really tough calls. Who decides exactly what gets produced? Who decides how it's made? And maybe the most loaded question, who actually gets to consume it? How a society answers those 3 questions completely defines its economic DNA. There are essentially 3 ways to set up the rules of the game here. On one extreme, you've got a pure market economy. Individuals own the assets, free markets run the show, and the government stays out of the way. Then, on the complete opposite end, you have the command economy. Think strict socialism, where the state owns the property, decides what everybody needs, and really limits consumer choice. But honestly, pure versions of either of those rarely exist. The vast majority of the real world sits right in the middle, as a mixed economy. It's a compromise. Free markets do their thing, but the government steps in to set the guardrails. On to Section 4. Who satisfies our needs? First off, the business world is basically split into 2 totally different universes. You have the formal sector. These are the heavyweights. Think massive registered corporate giants listed on the stock exchange like Old Mutual or Sasol. But running right alongside them is the informal sector. These are the micro-enterprises, those small, untaxed, independent family-run setups. They might fly under the radar, but they are absolutely crucial for keeping grassroots communities functioning. Now, zoom in on that formal sector for a second. Not every organization is playing the exact same game. We can break them down into three distinct types. First up, businesses, like Pick and Pay. They are purely profit-driven. If they don't make money, they go under. Second, government organizations, places like SAA or the SABC. The state creates these to provide services that are considered strategically or economically essential. And third, nonprofit organizations, like the SPCA. Their whole reason for waking up in the morning is service-driven, completely totally separated from chasing a profit. All of this interconnected chaos builds toward one huge goal: long-term sustainability. Society and the business world are practically chained together. They completely depend on each other. A business is doomed if it's trying to operate in a failing society, and a society is going to collapse without functioning businesses. Because of that incredibly deep connection, modern businesses can't just obsess over profit margins anymore. It's just not enough. They have to juggle making money with 5 massive themes of sustainability. We're talking social responsibility, employment equity, rock-solid business ethics, consumerism, and, of course, environmental sustainability. If a company just ignores these, well, their long-term survival is basically on a ticking clock. Which brings us to our final stop. Section 5, the science of management. Now, I really want to stress this. Business management is not just some empty corporate buzzword, and it's not just a natural talent you're born with. It is a hardcore, formal science. It is the dedicated study of the methods and principles that actually make an organization run efficiently. Remember those insanely scarce resources we talked about earlier? Management is literally the science of figuring out how not to waste them. To pull off that kind of efficiency, this science breaks a business down into 7 distinct functional gears. You've got general management, steering the whole ship; marketing, getting inside the consumer's head; financial, keeping the cash flowing; production, actually building the stuff; purchasing, tracking down the raw materials; human resources, taking care of the people; and public relations, guarding the reputation. Every single one of those 7 gears has to mesh perfectly for the machine to keep satisfying society's needs. And that brings us to the end of this explainer. We've seen exactly how heavily society leans on business to turn a tiny pile of resources into everything we need to survive. It's an incredibly delicate, high-stakes balancing act. So, I'll leave you with this. In a world driven by totally infinite needs, but restricted by strictly limited resources, how are you going to help manage the balance? Think about the businesses you buy from, the resources you use every day, and the real impact you have on this massive global engine. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep asking the big questions.